Welcome to Print Live. Today we look at will India's ties with US get better after the Modi-Trump meeting? Today, the past few months have been really turbulent for the Indo-US relationship. There was a lot of anticipation since Modi got re-elected last month, and Secretary Pompeo visited India just 2 days ago, and finally, US President Donald Trump and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi had their first bilateral meeting after almost a year and a half. Their last bilateral meeting happened in 2017. So, what did these two leaders talk about? Predominantly, as briefed by the MEA spokesman, the discussion ranged over four topics. They began with talking about Iran, where Modi expressed his India's interest in the region. And interestingly, he said that India has deployed Navy ships along the Strait of Hormuz, which are taking care of India's interest. This is interesting because recently Trump had tweeted out that American is the only one who's guarding all maritime choke points across the world. Thus, some of the major powers should be doing some of the load sharing. So that's one aspect. Then the discussion moved to 5G, where Prime Minister Modi said that India is soon going to be a country of 1 billion mobile phone users and they're all going to have internet. So we have to figure out a way how American domain expertise across 5G and this massive Indian market can be leveraged together. Then the discussion moved to trade. One of the most important breakthroughs came along in trade. The two leaders have decided to begin trade talks. We still don't know if the first meeting is going to be a technical one or India's Ministry of Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal will be meeting American trade representative Robert Lighthizer. And they briefly then discussed about the country's defense ties. There are three broad important observations here. Firstly, there seems to be Trump's attitude towards Modi has changed a bit since Modi got re-elected. He's a guy who likes dealing with powerful leaders, and since Modi came back with a thumping majority, you see Trump's interest in Modi reinstated. The second part is Modi seems to be slightly understanding where Trump is coming from, and you see a more accommodative Modi. So if you look at the agenda on the discussion today, they talked about Iran, then they moved to 5G, then they moved to trade talks, and then they finally had a very brief discussion about defense. We're getting a sense that Modi is allowing Trump to set the agenda. He's also pacifying him a little bit. Perhaps what's happening here is that Modi is realizing that India's relationship with the US is far too important to let a very transactional Donald Trump destroy it. So he is going to weather this storm and he is going to give him an accommodation here and there wherever possible. The last aspect of this relationship is, the last aspect of the important meeting is that the two countries have allowed to finally start trade talks, which is big, which seems to be one of the major sticking points. Now, we should be looking at some of the questions. One question is, would US sanctions affect India's interest in the Chabahar port? This is not really an issue. If you look at what Mike Pompeo said when he visited India a couple of days ago, that this is not an issue for them. There is a broader issue about India importing oil from Iran, and today Modi said that as well, that India meets about 11% of its energy needs from Iran. But over the past few months, Indian imports from Iran have dramatically fallen. That said, Chabahar is not an issue, and there's also another side to it, which is US has a lot of interest in Chabahar, and different US officials have expressed that Chabahar port allows them to find another route into Afghanistan. So broadly, US is in favor of India building the Chabahar port. Another question is, how will India grapple its interest in Afghanistan in case a deal between Taliban? This remains a sticking issue. If the US have an early exit from Afghanistan, it deeply undermines Indian strategic interest in the region. As we've seen over the past decade or so, Indian consulates, Indian officials, the infrastructure built by India have been targeted by Taliban, and this would continue remaining a very, very touchy issue. You'd see India very closely coordinating with American officials, and the Indian demand remains clear that you should not be getting out of Afghanistan the fashion in which you got out of Iraq about 15 years ago. That continues to be one of the points. A few more questions. Another question is on a more fundamental structural level is what are the kind of issues that have plagued the Indo-US relationship. So here the major sticking points between India and US has been trade. Americans have a lot of problems with India's laws about data localization and our draft e-commerce policy. Then they've also raised issue with India buying the S-400 long-range missiles. And then there are more issues about Indians buying Iranian oil. And then there is a long-term issue about Indian trade barriers, non-tariff and tariff being extremely high, and also Indian government not providing enough market access to American companies. It looks like we will see some of them being slowly resolved, but this is going to be a very long, tedious process. But broadly speaking, there is another major issue at play here, which is the Indo-American relationship was based on a lot of American optimism, that at some point India will grow fast enough, it'll modernize its military, and it'll become a genuine counterweight to China. Now, that hasn't happened with the kind of speed Americans would have liked it to. And here, a few years ago, Natwar Singh, when trying to talk about India's relationship with the US in 1987, he mentioned two books by Charles Dickens, which was Great Expectations and Hard Times. And we've kind of come back to that template again, where the expectations of Americans from India are very, very high, but India is not delivering at that speed. We'll take another question. The fact that there wasn't a hug this time, how significant is that? A hug on this occasion seemed highly, highly unlikely because the relationship between the two countries has been really tense. Even a day before this meeting happened, which was yesterday, Trump tweeted out that I'm really excited to meet PM Modi, but India's market access and trade issues remain, and India needs to lower its trade barriers. So when you're seeing such a hostile relationship, it's unlikely that the whole pomp and show of the usual Modi bear hugs is going to be on display. That said, we've been able to substantially improve the relationship, let's say from 6 months ago, when in January Trump talked about how India had built a library in Afghanistan, and he questioned like who goes to that library. So from that low point to a substantial agreement on how to resolve trade agreements, to Pompeo having a substantial speech, in the US-India Business Council, and then again at the India International Center here, we've moved a fair amount. It's going to be a tough road ahead, but we're in a far better position than we were a few months ago. That's all from us. Thank you. Please subscribe to ThePrint.